Well, good afternoon, everybody. In the next 5 years, we want to see less violent crime, with 20,000 fewer victims of crime, of assaults, robberies and sexual assaults. We also want to see reduced child and youth offending, with a 15% reduction in the number of children and young people with serious and persistent offending behaviour. Today I'm announcing a suite of sentencing reforms that reflect the government's commitment to restore law and order. The reforms have three key objectives: making sure there are real consequences for crime, restoring the principle of personal responsibility for offending, better recognising victims, particularly those who have suffered through years of increased retail crime. In recent years, we've seen increasingly serious crime coming before the courts. The response has been counterintuitive: a reduction in the use of imprisonment and shorter prison sentences overall, to the dismay of many victims. For example, the imprisonment rate for burglary offences with a maximum penalty of 10 years reduced from 50% in 2016-17 to 39% in 22-23. I'm concerned that undue leniency is resulting in a loss of public confidence in sentencing. For this reason, the government will limit sentence discounts so that we do not see some of the drastic sentence discounts that have been widely reported in recent times. The government's agreed to cap sentence discounts at 40%. There's also been concern around the growing use of concurrent sentencing for multiple offences. Victims are right to be concerned if the punishment for crimes committed on bail, in custody and on parole is simply rolled into the sentencing for the original offending. I know this is a particular concern for corrections officers, given the number of prisoners on staff assaults. That's why we're changing the law to set a clear expectation that cumulative sentences should generally be imposed for offending on bail, in custody and on parole, as committed to in the New Zealand First National Coalition Agreement. These tougher sentencing requirements build on other government reforms, including the restoration of 3 strikes and tougher sentences for gang-related offending. New Zealand has also grown increasingly impatient with sentences that respond to the background and circumstances of offending and not the decision to commit the crime. It's particularly frustrating for victims when offenders receive a sentence discount for expressing remorse, not once but for subsequent offending. This makes a mockery of the justice system, and it's why we're also changing the law to prevent repeat discounts for youth and remorse. I also want to set out some additional victims-focused measures. First is a direct response to the spike in retail crime, particularly offending against small businesses. The bill we'll introduce shortly includes a new aggravating factor to address offending against sole charge workers and those like dairy owners whose business is adjacent to their home, as committed in the National Act Coalition Agreement. It's right that offending against people who live in fear of theft and assault because they work alone, often with their families nearby, result in a tougher sentence. The law change will make it clear that a particular weight should be given to this factor in sentencing. I also think that the Sentencing Act strongly sends a signal to the courts that the victim's interest should always be in the front of mind in sentencing. The planned law changes adopt this approach by strengthening the principles of the sentencing in relation to victims, as committed to in both coalition agreements. Finally, these laws recognise that for victims of crime, having to give evidence at trial is hugely re-traumatising. As far as possible, I want to lift the burden from victims by ensuring that offenders are not unduly rewarded for pleading guilty close to trial. When this happens, defendants may delay entering a guilty plea, which strings out the court process, sometimes for many years. To address this issue, the planned legislation will introduce a sliding scale of sentence discounts for guilty pleas, with diminishing returns for a late-stage plea. Earlier guilty pleas would spare victims from having to prepare for and give evidence at trial and help improve court timeliness. The government's working at pace on these reforms. We recognise that the public and victims of crime especially don't want to wait very long for these sorts of reforms. I've directed officials to start work on drafting the legislation. Cabinet has agreed to the policy decision. The drafting is underway, and I intend to introduce into Parliament in the next few months so that it can be passed quickly thereafter. Happy to take any questions. Well, of course, Parliament writes the Sentencing Act, and it's absolutely appropriate for Parliament, reflecting the will and concern of the wider community around the prevalence of crime, to be clear about what its expectations are. Generally, the approach has been to set maximum sentences, but Parliament could send minimum sentences or it could have mandatory sentences. We haven't gone to those two things, but what we have sent is a clear signal that we want tighter boundaries around the reductions, and that's absolutely appropriate for Parliament to do. Well, our primary purpose is to send a clear message from Parliament that we want to have fewer massive discounts in sentencing so that people face real consequences for their crimes.
Why do you think judges are already giving these discounts? They're the ones who are intimately familiar with each case and the circumstances around the offender. Surely they're exercising their best judgment already in this case.
Yes, they can exercise their judgment, but the clear message that we've had from the community is there a concern around undue leniency for sentencing. We see, for example, the imprisonment rate for robbery offences with a maximum of 14 years has dropped from 74% in 2016 down to 58%. And there's examples right throughout the system where people have had, there's been less prison time for the equivalent offences over the last few years, and New Zealanders are concerned about that. They're not happy about that, and so we campaigned on restoring consequences of crime, and that's what we're delivering through this. It's not a question of trust for the judiciary, it's just a question of Parliament sending a clear signal about its intentions through the Sentencing Act. And that's quite appropriate for us to do, and that's what we're doing. No, it will be mandatory in the sense that what we're having is there are examples where people are pleading guilty right at the trial and still getting substantial discounts. And so if you're pleading guilty at the start of the trial, it will be a maximum of 5% rather than 25%. Well, look, I think it's a long-ranging concern that many victims groups have had. Is that the needs and concerns of the victims of crime haven't been really taken into account into the court processes, and so it's really just it's a stipulation that when sentencing is being taken, that greater focus and attention is given to the needs and concerns of the victims of crime. Now, one of the purposes of the sentencing regime is to denounce the act. And if you've been convicted of a serious sexual crime, for example, and the outcome of that is a home detention sentence, well, I can very well understand why the victims of that crime don't feel like their concerns have been properly met, and that's why we're trying to get the regime tougher through this process. Yes, we think in the short term there will be more people in prison as a result of these changes. The estimate is between 1,480 and an extra 1,730 per annum over 10 years. So the estimates are there will be more prisoners. Of course, our long-term desire is to see fewer people in prison because there is less serious crime. And our fundamental disagreement with the previous government was that they wanted to reduce the prison population regardless of what was going on. We wanted to reduce if there is a reduction in crime.
Do you expect to reduce crime by simply throwing more people in prison and then hoping they come out on the other end feeling, sufficiently punished?
Well, our goal to reduce the number of victims of crime will be achieved across some. There's a lot of things you have to do to achieve that. Part of the response is the justice response, which is to increase the chances of being caught and held to account, and that's part of the mix. There should be consequences for serious crime, but it's not the extent of the government response. Obviously, we have to be dealing with broader issues such as better treatment of addictions. If you're looking in the youth space, dealing with truancy, there's a wide number of things that we need to be looking at as a society, but one element is definitely restoring real consequences for crime.
Did National Campaign make
Yes, we did.
Where's that?
That's already been introduced as part of the gang legislation.
And when will you consider creating first, second and third degree, offences for murder as part of the New Zealand First Coalition Agreement?
Well, that's not part of this suite of reforms at the moment. It's something we're still considering.
What impact will these measures have on wait times in the court system? Will it exacerbate it by having more moving through it, or with people pleading guilty earlier in the process, will it improve in some senses as well?
Well, certainly the different discounts for guilty pleas is designed to speed up the court processes. At the moment, the system rewards people hanging on to the very last moment before pleading guilty, and so that has one of the factors in the longer delays in court processes has been people pleading guilty later in the process. So this is very much designed to speed that up. I mean, one of my three focuses in the justice sector is about reducing violent crime, or reducing serious youth offending, and the third one is around dealing with the long delays to justice, because people's lives are kept on hold for years under the current system. And so the guilty pleas element is very much focused on trying to speed up the processes of the courts.
You're not anticipating there being increased pressure on the system as well through these measures?
Across the board, we've got real challenges in terms of violent crime and the processes of the court. We've got a whole suite of work underway. There are 20-odd things we have to do this year to speed up the courts, and probably another 20 things next year, and so that's much broader than just justice. It involves the police, corrections, the judiciary, and so that is a very important part of our broader work effort.
Increasing the prison population is a condition. What is the cost of that? Can you
The estimate in terms of the extra 1,400 to 1,700 prisoners is a cost in between around 165 million and 192 million per year is our estimate, but of course it very much depends on the prevalence of crime over the years in advance. Of course, the budget invested $1.9 billion in extra corrections facilities, so we're prepared to make that investment if it means keeping our communities safer. The first point I'd make is certainly during the campaign last year, and nothing has changed in regard to that, number one issue that people raised everywhere was the cost of living and the pressures that people are facing in their households. A pretty consistent number two was a concern around community safety and law and order. Integral part of that is wanting to see consequences for crime. And of course, if you look at all the polling that continues, concern around law and order consistently is a significant area of concern for New Zealanders. We've certainly seen an increase in violent crime over just the past few years, a big increase in retail crime, big increase in aggravated robbery, all those things. And so we're wanting to turn that around so that people feel safe in their communities.
So election campaign conversations and some public polling, we haven't commissioned any or
No, I mean, that's how our political system works, actually, that the politicians are supposed to be responsive to the concerns of the community, and that's what we're seeking to do. And so we campaign to do this very clearly, and what we're doing today is fulfilling our commitments to bring in tougher sentencing regimes.
Isn't there a bit of feedback also if you were out there campaigning on crime and talking about crime and making it the issue?
Well, I don't think we're making it the issue. I think everybody can see with their eyes that there's been cars driven into dairies on a regular basis, that ram raids have gone up significantly, and there has been an increase in violent crime. It's not for us to make it up, it's obvious to everybody, and they want a better response, and that's what we're going to deliver.
But once you come into office, now
Yep.
serious downstream consequences. You're talking about the increase of the prison population. You haven't decided to go and root out all of those potential unintended consequences in other ways that this could be done.
No, we're confident in the direction that we're headed.
Encouraging the use of cumulative sentencing for those offences committed on bail in custody and on parole is not the same as the National Executives Agreement, which was to remove concurrent sentences. So is this a violation of that agreement?
No, it's been agreed by Cabinet, and this is our first step. We went through that as an issue and decided if we make it very clear that the expectation is that cumulative sentences should be applied. And if we find that we have to go further later, we will, but this is where we've got to.
And will youth and remorse be one-off discounts? And is there a seriousness there around the offending official?
Yes, the youth and remorse, we don't believe that you can be remorseful 10 times. It sort of doesn't make sense. And when we're talking about youth, we're talking about 18 to 25-year-olds. The definition of youth seems to be getting older and older. So we're not talking about young people. That's a separate regime that Minister Shaw is responsible. But for 18, 22-year-olds, youth has led to significant discounts. And that's fine once, but we don't think that it can be used on multiple occasions.
Could you just, on the previous question around the sentencing, could you explain why you came to the decision to change that?
Well, entirely remove concurrent sentences would have very, very significant impact on the prison population, and we think this is an appropriate first step.
Obviously, these are quite punitive measures in sentencing, but are you confident there's enough investment in preventative work in the first place to actually prevent these crimes taking place?
Oh, yeah, it's all part of our broader justice policy, which is, it's also, there's greater investment in rehabilitation programs for prisoners who are on remand, and we're very conscious of the broader issues that we have to deal with in terms of emergency housing, addictions, all those longer-term drivers of crime. But part of the mix needs to be a clearer accountability for actions, and that's what we're setting about with the sentencing regime.
And did you think that could act as a deterrent and will help to bring down crime, or
Yes, yes. I mean, it comes back to a sort of a basic view of the world. Should people face consequences for their actions? We believe they should. There has been a concern that those consequences have been diminished in the last few years by excessive discounts, and that's why we're moving to make these changes.
Just on the discount part of it, is the young adult list pilot continuing? That was, I understand it was being broadened out as part of the Marama work through the court system. Is that going to continue for the 18 to 20?
I understand so. The Tao Marama work is continuing on, and so that's very much part of the mix.
What work has been done to understand how this will impact Māori around new work or engagements?
It's a long-going issue that we've faced as a country. That's been higher imprisonment rates for Māori, and we're conscious of that. We're also conscious that Māori are more likely to be the victims of crime, particularly more serious repeat victims of crime, and so they have obviously an interest in ensuring that there are consequences for crime as well. So, like everybody, Māori have an equal interest in ensuring that these sort of changes are made.
Did you engage with those communities with announcements?
Well, of course, we engage right across through the election process and continuing, and so engagement continues, and this will be going off to a select committee where everybody will have a chance to have a say.
Can you specify how that engagement was carried out? Because otherwise it would be a breach of the principle if it wasn't
Well, we are continuing to engage with, Māori do not, it's not just one group to engage with, there's a variety of views and opinions, and there are many processes and opportunities throughout this process as we go through the select committee process for people to engage. All right, I think that...
Just quickly, what update can you share about the Ministry of Justice's work to consider foreign interference crimes in the Crimes Act?
Well, we have got work underway in that space, and when we've got announcements to make, we'll make them.
Where's it at? It's been, I think, possibly over a year now since the work began. Has any progress been made?
Yes, good progress has been made, but I'm not in the position to announce that today.
When are we going to see an outcome?
Soon.
And how's it going to be delivered? Will you hold a press conference like this?
Quite possibly. We'll figure that out when we get closer to
Are
it.
you looking at a register, looking to create a register of foreign agents, or the Australian?
Like I say, when we've got announcements for making that space, we'll make them. I'm not going to speculate on that at the moment.
Is there a gap in crimes act? Is there a gap in crimes act foreign interference at the moment?
Well, there are issues that we're working our way through in that space, and I think what people will observe when we look in the justice space is that there is a very busy pipeline of legislation that we're working our way through, from gangs through to 3 strikes, through the sentencing reform in the youth justice space. There's a huge amount of work we're doing, and we're going at it at a faster pace because people want to see results. Thank you very much. Much appreciated.